Time keeps its own counsel. It measures moments not in seconds but in consequence. The slow accretion of pressure and temperature, the turning of the moon, the curl of a swell on a foreign shore. On a wet night in early June 1944, time gathered itself into a single question. Would the sea behave long enough for men to cross it and change the map of Europe? The Allied invasion of Normandy was an architecture of precision. It demanded the moon, the tide, the wind and the sky to line up with a brutality of care. A full moon to light airborne landings and let pathfinders find their drop zones. A falling tide at dawn to expose the German obstacles hidden on the beaches. Wind and swell low enough for landing craft and assault boats to hold their course. Cloud bases high enough for transport aircraft and gliders to fly, and for naval gunfire to see its fall. Each of those things was a piece of weather, and weather is stubbornly indifferent to human schedules. In the dim, humming offices of the Allied Meteorological Service in London, a team worked like cartographers of the future. On wooden tables, pencil lines and inked isobars became landscapes. On telephone circuits, coded observations passed like lives. Among the men whose names have been recorded for history, Group Captain James Stagg stood as the visible authority, the man who would brief commanders and advise the Supreme Allied Commander. But the charts were read and the arguments made by many hands, and among them was a woman who has largely escaped the long columns of history. A forecaster not content to annotate the facts, but who pressed them until they yielded a decision. She sat with a barograph's slow, insistent tracery and a synoptic chart that spoke of a storm. The data coming in was ugly. Low pressure deepening over the Atlantic. A swell building to heights that would toss landing craft like toys. Cloud decks that would hide the ground from pilots and scatter paratroopers into hedgerows. The original hour for invasion, the dawn of June 5th, was a plan pinned on a fragile assumption of calm. Now that assumption was gone. Where some saw only one option, she found another. Reading the lines of pressure and the reported sequences from ships and coastal stations, she saw not a single unbroken gale, but a trough that would move eastward and a temporary ridge, a knuckle of high pressure, pushing through the channel for roughly 24 hours. In plain language, a brief window, a lull in the storm. If an invasion could be timed into that narrow pocket, the necessary conditions might be met for a dawn assault. If not, the next available opening would be weeks away, when the moon and tide no longer served the plan. To make that case was to go against the grain. The room was crowded with instruments and with doubt. Models were crude by modern standards. Forecasts were the patient assembly of disparate observations. Readings from weather ships, barometers on freighters, reports from Iceland and the Norwegian coast, and the thin intelligence scraped from German weather stations. Radios crackled. Men who had built their reputations on caution argued for postponement. Others worried that any delay would bleed the operation dry of surprise and synchronization. Military schedules do not like to be told to wait by a line on a map. She did not dramatize her certainty. She worked it through, cross-checked ship reports, weighed the motion of isobars, estimated wave heights from wind histories. She knew not only what the charts said, but what they meant for the men who would step from steel into water. A force of that scale could not be risked to optimism alone, nor could it be stalled by pessimism when a scientific reading suggested a different course. So she spoke, and her voice, measured and precise, insisted on one thing. There would be a short, favorable interval on the morning of June 6. Group Captain Stagg listened, as did others. He had to take the argument up the line, to Eisenhower, commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, and what was passed could not be a subtlety but a margin. The commander did not ask for genius so much as courage, the courage to trust a forecast in the teeth of chance. At the heart of it was a simple, terrible arithmetic. proceed and risk throwing men into a storm, or delay and surrender momentum to weeks of planning, to the moon's slow turning, to the enemy's preparedness. Against that calculus, the meteorological opinion that favored June 6 weighed like a small but pivoting lever. On a night that smelled of oil and wet canvas, commanders hunched over maps, and the decision was reached. Orders were altered, transmissions went out. The Armada, thousands of ships, landing craft, and escorts that had been held in English ports, slipped their moorings and took station off the channel. Men went below to rest for an hour or two, and tried, in pinched sleep, to imagine the sea they would meet. Dawn on June 6 was not a gift. It arrived under a sky scrubbed and pale, not the pellucid clearness that a campaign might wish for, but a temperamental mercy. Lower winds, seas still running but not monstrous, cloud layers that allowed the C-47s to find airfields and, crucially, permitted pilots to carry pathfinders and glider-borne troops to their drop zones. The tide at dawn did what the planners needed. Machines and humans met weather in a choreography of risk, and the invasion began. What followed is blunt and awful history. Men died in numbers that make the heart sink. Beaches ran with blood and bunkers took their toll. Still, the invasion held. The foothold that morning, carved out on a shoreline of concrete and steel, was the lever for everything that followed. Once the Allies had a lodgment on the continent, the logistics and the industrial weight of a coalition began to tilt the balance. Liberation moved from a plan to a movement. The war did not end that day, but its course changed. When history asks how, it collects heroes by the thousands. Commanders, privates, sailors, pilots. It also asks why, and for that question the answer is often a stitchwork of small acts and quiet professions. The woman who argued for that weather window did not fire a shot, nor did she stand in the glare of command. She applied a form of knowledge that is at once humble and consequential. Meteorology is part forecast, part translation. It turns measurements into judgment calls that carry human weight. She took the measured data and, with a steady hand, tilted the world toward a dangerous but necessary choice. There is something profound in that kind of courage. It is not the drama of a battlefield charge, but the steadiness of a person willing to stand between uncertainty and decision. In the room where she worked, there were no fanfares, only charts and the soft tapping of instruments. Yet her work moved, invisibly, the gears of history. It reminds us that wars are not only fought in trenches and factories, but in offices where people decide what the weather will allow them to attempt. After the landings, the record was written in many hands. Group Captain Stagg's name is recorded as the man who advised the invasion. Eisenhower's draft of a letter taking responsibility in the event of failure sits somewhere as a sober testament to the stakes. But the fuller portrait includes dozens of analysts, forecasters, and unnamed technicians, many of them women, who stitched together a forecast from pieces of an unruly atmosphere. In an era when much of women's work was invisible, theirs was a kind of visibility that changed the face of the war. There is a philosophical seam in this story, the notion that knowledge tempers fate. Weather is a force impartial to human projects, but human beings do not simply submit to it. They learn to listen to it, to interpret it, to weigh its moods. That listening requires humility, to accept chance as a factor, and it also requires will, to take responsibility for a prediction and its consequences. The invasion of Normandy was not an act of defiance against the elements, but of negotiation with them, brokered by people who could translate barometric lines into moments of action. Now, decades on, the Channel is again a place for ferry traffic and fishing boats. The beaches are memorials where grass softens the outlines of ramp and rampart. But memory, like weather, is layered. Beneath the visible tableau, there are patterns that repeat. The urgency of decisions made in haste, the thinness of the margin between success and disaster, and the quiet influence of those who work at the boundaries of knowledge. This is not a story meant to flatten the cost into a neat moral. Courage does not cancel loss, yet it is a reminder of where power sometimes lives. In the case made with numbers, the conviction held when everyone else suggests delay, the insistence that a fleeting window be taken. The woman who read the sky and argued for a June morning did not guarantee victory, but she supplied the condition without which victory would have been immensely harder, perhaps impossible in the timetable the Allies required. In that way, she altered the affordances of history. Time keeps its counsel, but it also remembers the hands that guided it. On some nights, the weather will open a small, unlikely door. On others, it will slam shut. The stories we tell about great events should not forget the small decisions that let them happen. In a room of maps, a woman read the sky and refused the easy answer. Because of that refusal, thousands of men stepped onto a shore whose name would come to mean liberation. Because of that decision, the arc of a war bent, however painfully, toward its end. History often seeks its giants on the battlefield. But sometimes the most consequential courage is quiet, measured, and rendered in degrees of pressure and a line of ink across a chart. In the soft, precise voice of a forecaster, the future was briefly made visible, and many lives and the fate of nations moved through that thin, luminous window. The world was changed not by a single thunderclap, but by a careful reading of the weather, and by the bravery of the person who trusted what she saw enough to insist the world act upon it.